that short intermission. I am glad you all are here. I see it might be a little bit before folks pile back in completely. So welcome back, and thank you for enduring that short intermission. That's the risk of doing, streams at this time of day. We may get interrupted, but I think it's good to do them at different times of day so that more people can be involved. And, this is a much better time for our European friends, for example. So since we had this brief interruption, I think what we'll do, I have a number of super chat questions to answer. So I'll start answering some of them. And once a number of people have piled back in, then we'll do our roll call, and then I'll continue with the super chat questions. I gave my opening remarks. That was the first section, and that is complete. I've completed my opening remarks. So I'm going to start answering super chats, and when I get about halfway through the super chats that I have here, then we'll do the roll call, and then from there, I'll continue to answer super chats until we're done. That's the agenda for today. Alrighty, so the first super chat question I received is the Workers' Party of Korea revisionist? Well, what is revisionism? That is a fair question, right? Most people understand revisionism as, if I don't agree with you, and I think that you are impure in your application of Marxism, that makes you a revisionist. No, you didn't miss the roll call. We're going to do the roll call after I get through a few super chats, and once everyone's piled back in, then we will do that. So no, you didn't miss the roll call. No fear. Revisionism is a word that comes from Edward Bernstein. Now, Edward Bernstein was a leader of the Marxist movement in Austria and Germany, and he came forward with his concept of revisionism, which was the idea that you don't need a revolution to overturn capitalism. That capitalism just kind of naturally, one day at a time, evolves into socialism. He said the movement is everything, the goal is nothing. And he argued that because they already had universal male suffrage in many European countries, because they had 12-hour factory workdays, that there was no need, there was no revolution, that capitalism just kind of naturally, through the process of events, kind of gradually turns into socialism. That's revisionism. And revisionism is basically the worldview of modern social democracy. This is what modern social democrats believe. You can build socialism one step at a time. Now, during the Cold War, China accused the Soviet Union of revisionism. It accused the Soviet Union of revisionism, arguing that it had betrayed principles. Khrushchev, because he was holding back revolution in the developing countries, was a revisionist. So revisionist has become more of a slur. It's a way of saying to somebody, you are not pure in your application of Marxism. You are not a real Marxist. You are a revisionist. That's what it has come to mean. And generally, that's how it's used on the internet. But it actually did refer to a real ideology by real people who called themselves revisionists. And Edward Bernstein, in his concept of evolutionary socialism as opposed to revolutionary socialism, that's what revisionism actually is. But so the question is the Workers' Party of Korea revisionist? I don't think so. I think the Workers' Party of Korea is a Marxist party that has seized power on the Korean Peninsula and is working its hardest with a centrally planned economy to raise the Korean people up out of poverty. They would like to unify the peoples of the Korean Peninsula. Which faction of the ruling class is most complicit in CIA-backed regime change? Faction. Regime change. So, yeah, I think that the Workers' Party of Korea is hoping to reunify its people. It wants to reunify the Korean people that have been divided. And it wants to raise its people out of poverty. And they have applied Marxist principles to the Korean Peninsula. And that's what they're doing. They have applied Marxist principles to the Korean Peninsula. They've developed their own ideas. I think that the current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, would like to move in a Deng Xiaoping market reforms direction. He would like there to be more foreign investment in North Korea. He would like that North Korea have more, of a role in the international economy. However, they cannot do that because they've been locked out of the international economy because they proliferated nuclear weapons, right? North Korea was a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and developed their own nuclear weapons. Because of that, they have been subject to sanctions, and they are largely locked out of the international economy. Now, at some point, it is very likely North Korea will give up its nuclear weapons and rejoin the international economy. Those sanctions will be lifted. They'll be able to trade with China and Russia and with other countries much more. And that will probably eventually happen, and that will result in a lot of foreign investment coming into North Korea and raising people out of poverty. Is that revisionism? No, that is simply a method that the Korean Workers' Party would utilize to carry out their goal of building a prosperous socialist society on the Korean Peninsula. I urge people to avoid, the ultra Maoists. Right, the people that think China stopped being, became no good when Deng Xiaoping came to power. The people who think that Cuba is the Soviet Union's sugar plantation, and all the Cuban people were slaves of the evil Russians, and the people that push these crazy ultra leftist ideas, and the only revolution they could possibly support are like crazy ultra left extremists like El Sendero Luminoso in Peru. Those folks push a narrative where it's like if you don't say the right magic words, right? If you don't say the right incantations from the Mao's Little Red Book, then you're not a real communist, you're a revisionist. Well, that is not Marxism, that's idealism. That is idealism, right? The idea that if you read the right incantations and you say the right magical words, you're really socialist. But if you don't say the right magical words and the right incantations, you're not really socialist. That is idealism, right? The reality is defined by material. It's not defined by ideas, right? And that, look, for example, look at the capitalist revolution. When France had its capitalist revolution, at first it was an atheist state, right? They converted all the churches to temples of reason. Then after that, Napoleon came back and restored Catholicism. When I earlier talked about the English Civil War, and when Britain had its capitalist revolution, they were fanatical Roundhead Puritans. They had a very different ideology. In Britain, they were fanatical Protestants. In France, they were atheists for a while, and then they became Catholics. But the economic foundations were the same. Post-revolutionary France, capitalist. England, during the English Civil War, capitalist. The economic system was the same, even though the ideas and the ideology being extolled by the governments and by the leaders was different. Ideas do not define reality. Socialism is a property relation. It is not defined by the magical incantations that leaders espouse. And, Gaddafi's Libya. Gaddafi was not a Marxist, you'll have to remember. No. Are you a Freemason? No, I'm not. That's an interesting question. All right. Gaddafi's Libya was socialist, even though Gaddafi was not a Marxist. He preached Islamic socialism, right? Syria, under the leadership of the Ba'athist Arab socialists. They are a socialist country, but their economic foundations are socialist, but their ideology is not Marxist. They draw from Marx. They're not Marxists. Venezuela, Bolivia, these are socialist countries, right? Nicaragua, but their leaders are not pure Marxists, right? They adopt elements of Christianity, they adopt elements of indigenous practices, they adopt the teachings of Simón Bolívar, but these are socialist countries, right? China, socialism with Chinese characteristics. That socialism is defined by property relations. And it's not defined by whether or not you have the magical correct words. Now, Marxism is very useful because it explains how history works. It explains how the economy works. It's a tool, it's a science that can be utilized in helping the construction of socialism, understanding where the world is going. But Marxism is not a religion. You don't become impure if you stray from the holy teachings of Karl Marx, right? That's not how this works. And that is the problem that the Gang of Four had, and Mao in his late life too, right? That this idea that Marxism is the holy, true doctrine, and that anyone who strays from it thus becomes a revisionist and burns in hell for all eternity for betraying the true teachings of Marx, Lenin, and Mao, that's not scientific thinking, right? If you start thinking that way, you have left the realm of Marxism, and you have entered the realm of idealism and religion, right? And you have turned Marxism, instead of being a scientific tool and a method for understanding the world, you've turned it at that point into a religious device by which you can, you can be religious or something. I mean, there's a pamphlet published during the Cultural Revolution. I'll never forget this. I tried to find it online. I found it in an old communist office, and it made me laugh. It's called The Application of Mao Zedong Thought in Everyday Life. It's sad, right? It's essays by people in China applying Mao Zedong thought to their everyday life. One guy is a bus driver, right? And he talks about how he applies Mao Zedong thought in his driving of the bus, and how if he drives too fast, that's ultra-leftism. But if he drives too slow, it's revisionism, right? And how by applying Chairman Mao's teachings to his driving of his bus, he does it in the most pure Marxist way. This is silliness. Thank you, David, and you're right. Marxism is a guide to action. I'll address that, right? And that you never want to see Marxism, you never want to view Marxism, as a religious doctrine, right? I mean, it's a very, very, very silly pamphlet. But you can see that's why the Cultural Revolution was a disaster for China, is people were thinking about this, right? They were thinking, I better not drive too slow or I'm a revisionist. But if I drive too fast, then I'm an ultra-leftist. I must drive at exactly the right speed to carry out Chairman Mao's true revolutionary line. This is silliness, okay? This is absolute silliness, and don't think that way. If you think that way, I can guarantee you what will happen, and I've seen this many times in my life. I mean, and I'm not that old, but I've seen this. People who start thinking that way, they get into Marxism, they view it that way, right, as this infallible ideology that can have no wrongs and all of that, and pretty soon, something comes along and disproves it, and then they turn against communism, and they go back and live a normal life. If you view Marxism that way, if you give it that place in your life, it becomes your God. Pretty soon that God will fail, and then you will abandon it, right? And that's the thing. Marxism is a tool. Marxism is a tool and nothing more than that. So the Korean Workers' Party is guided by Marxism, absolutely. Are they revisionists? Well, I mean, they don't adhere to Edward Bernstein's teachings of evolutionary and pro-imperialist socialism, so I don't think that they're followers of revisionist Marxism. Have they strayed from the pure teachings of Karl Marx in some ways? Of course, right? Because in the real world, they are guided by Marxism, sure, but they are not pure in the sense that they're applying it. And no socialist country is. No socialist country is pure. Every socialist country in history engages in political innovation. Every socialist country in history engages in political innovation. So that's the answer to the first Super Chat question. Folks, if you're just joining us now, since we had to restart, let me be clear. I am going to do the roll call. I'm going to get through the first few Super Chats because we had to restart the live stream. But then after that, I will answer the roll call questions, and from there, so I'm going to get through the first few Super Chat questions, then we'll do the roll call, then I'll do the rest of the Super Chat questions. I'm giving people time to come back in to the room because we had to restart, and this is part 2. It's unfortunate I had to have a break here, but it's good we did this at a different time of day than we normally do. So, all right. Left-wing nationalism is the next question. All right. Well, Marxism originally, again, this kind of relates to what we were talking before about nationalism, right? Or about Marx and the impurity. Karl Marx opposed all nationalism. Karl Marx said, workers of the world unite, national barriers are not good, there should be no nations, but the international working class. That was Marx's view. And what's interesting is that, the major communist uprising that happened during Karl Marx's life, the Paris Commune of 1871, was very nationalistic. What happened was that France and Prussia were having a war, and the French government collapsed during that war. So the workers of Paris seized control, and they did so on a very nationalistic basis. They said, our French Revolution and our French traditions are not going to surrender to the Prussian Empire. So the Paris Commune was a very nationalistic uprising, despite being a workers' uprising. But that's beside the point. Marx said, all nationalism is reactionary. In the final years of his life, he became sympathetic to the Irish freedom struggle and the Irish national liberation movement. And so he started talking in some of his writings and his letters about how the Irish people were fighting for their independence as a nation, and maybe that was a progressive thing. But Marx was starting to question that in regards to Ireland in the final years of his life. But overall, Marx, if you read what Karl Marx said, there is no good nationalism. But Lenin comes along, and Lenin comes out with his thesis of imperialism. Capitalism is not just a system of factory owners oppressing their workers. It's a system of global monopolies and huge corporations and cartels, carving out spheres of influence in the developing world. Marxism says capitalism has entered its highest stage of imperialism. And in imperialism, there are entire nations that are oppressed, right? That the capitalists, the imperialist capitalists, the Western bankers and monopolies that dominate the world, they don't just make profits, they make super profits. And the people of the developing world, they are factory workers, but they're not simply exploited, but they are super exploited, right? And that they are members of an oppressed nation. They are a colonized people. Why? They're a colonized people. And that nations can fight for their independence on the basis of nationality, right? That there can be national liberation struggles. And aside from the Russian Revolution, most socialist revolutions that have happened in the 20th century have been fought on the basis of national liberation. That, the Chinese Revolution was about China freeing itself from imperialism. The Cuban Revolution was about Cuba freeing itself from imperialism. Libya's revolution was about Libya freeing itself from imperialism. Vietnam's revolution was about Vietnam freeing itself from imperialism. But why are communists at the center of the struggle? Because the national bourgeoisie of these third world countries is too weak. It's too poor in relation to Wall Street and London to fight for its national liberation on its own. And so the working class must take up the center of the struggle for national liberation. The working class is millions and millions of people, and the national bourgeoisie is too weak. So it is the working class that leads the struggle for national liberation. So national liberation leads to socialism, right? That is the understanding that Lenin brings to this, right? That the working class ultimately becomes the vanguard of the struggle for liberation. And that as countries fight imperialism, they are almost forced to move towards socialism. Because the only way to really resist the imperialists is to break your economy free. And the only way to have an economy that is strong enough to really break free is to have the means of production organized not according to profits. So national liberation leads to socialism. Socialism leads to national liberation. And in the developing world, socialism and nationalism are tied up together, right? That countries fighting for their liberation from imperialism as nations and the struggle of the working class to control the means of production and society to have a rationally organized economy that serves the people and not profits, these struggles are integrally locked in together. The struggle for national liberation and the struggle for socialism are tied in together. So in that sense, all nationalism in the developing world is kind of left-wing. And to be left-wing in the developing world is kind of to be a nationalist. Now, then that raises the question, what about us in the first world? Right? What about us here in the first world? Right? We're not in the developing world. We are in the imperialist homeland. We're here in the United States. Well, we cannot be nationalists in the United States because we would be national chauvinists, right? In the United States, my whole life, I have endlessly heard the phrase, this is the greatest country in the world. America is the greatest country in the world. America is the greatest country in the world. And people say this phrase all the time without thinking about it. America is the greatest country in the world. America is the greatest country in the world. America is the greatest country in the world. And if you so much as ask, hey, how did you measure this? Like, are we the most free country? Or are we the richest? Like, what is your measure of greatness? People look at you and go, what? Are you saying that America is not the greatest country in the world? You must be brainwashed, because everybody knows America is the greatest country in the world. That's not nationalism, per se. That's what you call national chauvinism. You are saying that your country is better. If you think white people are the best people in the world, you're a white chauvinist. If you think men are superior to women, then you are a male chauvinist, right? And what people call nationalism in the United States, what, this kind of stupid America is number one, that is national chauvinism. And Marxists should reject national chauvinism. Absolutely reject national chauvinism. However, right, that doesn't mean you reject patriotism, right? What is patriotism? Right? Now, the root word of patriotism is the same as the root word of patriarchy. Right? The leader of a family is a patriarch, and one is expected to have loyal to one's family. Right? Now, the root word of patriotism is also patriarch, and it's the same kind of concept. If you live in a country, you're expected to have some loyalty to that country. Just like if you live in a household, you're expected to have loyalty to your family. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with being loyal to your family. If you grow up in a family and you are loyal to your mother and your father, and if you're a parent and you're loyal to your children, or if you're a married person and you're loyal to your spouse, there's nothing wrong with that. And you're not saying that your family is superior to other families. You are simply saying that I have a special affiliation to my family. Patriotism is the same concept. It's not saying that your family is better. It's not saying that your nation is better than any other nation. I'm not saying that. It's not saying that your nation should go around beating down other nations. It's saying that because you are part of a country, you have a particular loyalty to that country. Right? And that I would argue that every communist is both, as Mao Zedong says in the Little Red Book, a patriot and an internationalist. You are a patriot in the sense that you love your country and you want to make life better in your country. But you are an internationalist because you recognize the only way that life can get better for your country is for your country to join in the global struggle against imperialism and the liberation of the proletariat. So, in every sense, a communist is a true patriot, but a communist rejects national chauvinism and is a true internationalist. And this is a balance. There's a whole chapter in Mao's Little Red Book called Patriotism and Internationalism. Communists love the country in which they live. They love it so much that they're internationalists, and they want it to break free and join the global struggle against capitalism and imperialism. Communists are the ultimate patriots. They are the ultimate rejectors of national chauvinism. But they are the ultimate internationalists in that they want their country to stand arm in arm with the people around the world in the struggle against imperialism. So there you go. I've answered super chat number 2. Now, the next question is, how do you turn a slogan into reality? Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's right. Like, so how do you think something and then do it, right? There's a process, right? Words derive from actions derive from thoughts. So how do you then put it into practice? That's the question. How do you then put it into practice? I think it's a matter of concrete action, and that's what we're trying to do. Things are difficult with the Center for Political Innovation, but we're doing it. Right? We are doing it. We're raising the consciousness of the people, etc. So how do you turn a slogan into a reality? I think it's a question of engaging with the broad masses of people and pushing them into a direction where they can really embrace your slogan and fight to bring it into reality. All right, so that is the first 3 Super Chat questions since we've resumed. So now we can have our roll call that we normally have right after the opening remarks, but things all got confused because now we're in the second part. So roll call, names and locations, folks. I will call you out as I see you, then we'll continue with the Super Chats, and then we'll be done. So who's with us today? Australia, nowhere in particular. Very good. Names and locations. Hungary, Mom's Basement, Warrington, UK, Chicago, Ramiro in East LA, Mo from Toronto, JT24. I learn a lot from your videos, lives, and books. Thanks, says Captain Waffles. Well, you're welcome. JT24 in Mississippi, Northern Louisiana, Illinois, Legend of Shanghai, California, United States, Australia, Canada, Brooklyn, Bendigo, Australia, David Fox, Long Island, New York, Will Lotz, very good. Bitcoin State, Kathy in Boston, welcome Kathy. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Liverpool, UK, Denver, St. Louis, Missouri, thanks for the great chat, you got it, Midwest Populist. Auckland, New Zealand, Munich, East Germany, Eastern Poland, Billings, Montana, hoping Joshy's feelings better. I don't know what that is. Okay. Order of the Red Banner. I don't know what that is. Belize, Texas, Socialist Dragon in Texas, Mario in Croatia, Gateshead, England, Australia, Canada, Pomona, California, Tim Stacy in Kentucky, Alabama, Ithaca, New York, Michael, welcome, welcome. Shaniqua from Buffalo, welcome, welcome, Shaniqua. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Joseph Lennon, Nate from Sydney, Australia, Chicago, not here, says Dylan. Glasgow, Scotland, Bermuda, Adelaide, Australia, Unit, Greece, Oregon. Don from Mickey Rocks, Pennsylvania. Dustin, North Carolina. James from Pennsylvania. Jose Gonzalez in Venezuela. Kenny from Malaysia. Solidarity from sunny Southwest Florida. Billings, Montana. Cowboy Comrade, Houston. UK. Juan from Mexico. Pittsburgh Proletariat Gang, Toronto, Lily in Atlanta, good friend of the program, Montevideo in Uruguay, Kieran from San Diego, South Africa, Washington State, UK, Houston, Texas, Kendall in San Diego, Northern Michigan, A Better America, Leipzig, East Germany, very, very good, it's hottest, right? Very, very good. Very, very good. Very good, folks. Glad you're with us today. San Francisco Bay Area, California, 5G, the Netherlands, very, very good. Comrade Julian in the UK, whole gangs here. Folks, since we had to resume, since this is part 2, please tweet this out once again. Please tweet out part 2 so people rejoin. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. People are getting unsubscribed. I got a super chat about that earlier. They're messing with us in the subscriptions department. Don't let them get away with it. Hit the subscribe button to make sure that they don't mess with us. We don't like that, right? So hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell so you get notified next time we do one of these, because the more here, the merrier. And for the remainder of the program, I will be answering the remaining super chat questions. We got Longshan from Toronto, Mohsen from Iran, welcome, welcome. So keep the super chats rolling in, folks. If you got questions, I will answer them. I did the first 3, then we just did our roll call. And so now I will continue answering your super chat questions. All right, Ayo Hillary in New York City is with us, very good. Tony Malone is with us. Mecca Shiva is in Missouri. Very good. All right, so the next question we have here is, how do you refute the Nazis were socialists argument made by the right wing? Very easily, right? Socialism is defined by property relations, not by words. The Nazis had the name socialist in the name of their party, but property relations never changed. And in fact, in the lead up to Hitler taking power, he had an exchange of letters with one of his followers named Gregor Strasser, and they had a back and forth argument in which Hitler said that there was nothing wrong with capitalism, that capitalism is fine as long as they're loyal to the nation, blah, 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 blah. And you'll notice that when the Nazis came to power, they built the autobahns, which were big highways. They restarted military armaments and war manufacturing, but at no point did they really nationalize industries. The banks, factories, and industries of Germany were not operated according to the interests of the people. They were operated according to profits. In fact, there was a banker, a wealthy banker named Hjalmar Schacht, who was the economist of the Nazi state. And if you want to understand the economics of Nazism, watching from Tampa, Florida, says Herb Bryant. Welcome, Herb. Always welcome. If you want to understand the economics of the Nazi state, I recommend you read the book Hitler's Banker about Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht. He was the economist of Nazi Germany, and at no point did the property relations in Germany change. In Germany, the banks, factories, and industries operated according to profits. German capitalists were trying to make profits. Now, there was a heavy amount of government spending on prisons, government spending on military armaments, government suppression of ethnic minorities and disabled people, etc. The government was heavily involved in the German economy, but its intervention was not done to control the economy. I would argue that Nazi Germany was a Bonapartist state because at no point did production in Nazi Germany take place according to a predetermined plan. Production in Nazi Germany was carried out according to profits. It was a profit-centered economy. And there was never a situation where the state was planning out the economy, raising people out of poverty. No, I mean, there was heavy government stimulation of various things. There were some Keynesian measures where the government was spending money to build roads and stuff, but at no point did the German economy stop being a for-profit economy. The Krupps and the Tysons maintained their private corporations. Why are people homeless? Because there are too many houses. All righty. Okie dokie. All righty. Next question. American socialists being classist. Absolutely. I've seen quite a bit of that. One of my biggest grievances with many of the American socialist groups is they operate in urban areas, and they operate in urban centers like New York City, where I currently live, like Chicago, like San Francisco, like Los Angeles. And based on that, a lot of socialist groups believe that white people who are working class do not exist. No, I swear, many communist groups operate on the assumption they think working class is a synonym for black. They think working class is a synonym for not white. And it is based on the fact that they're in an urban area, right? In urban areas, white people tend to be middle-class professionals. People of color tend to be working class. Get outside of the urban areas, it's not like that at all. You have working class people of all nationalities, a friend of mine went to prison. She went to prison on Rikers Island. And I remember she was from a family, grew up in a trailer park. She was doing time for Occupy Wall Street protests. And I remember when she got to the jail, she was in a jail with, cell block with all women of color, and they thought she must be rich. They thought she was a trust fund girl who was shoplifting or something, because no white person could ever be working class, right? And a lot of socialist groups operate on that assumption, that every white person must be wealthy because working class is synonymous for black. And that is not the truth. There are millions and millions of working class white people in the United States of America. Millions, right? And socialist groups pretend they don't exist. Socialist groups often have the attitude that white people that white people are automatically middle class, and white people who are not are all fascists, right? It's a cultural thing. I mean, one thing I have seen endlessly in socialist groups, and I get a lot of flack for pointing this out, but I will point it out, is that middle-class white people tend to dominate socialist groups. And these middle-class white people have a white savior complex, not a class view. And that it manifests itself in a kind of condescending racism to people of color and a gut-level hatred for white workers. For example, one thing I have seen many times in the socialist movement is that there are cultural things that are just working class, right? Working class people culturally tend to be a little bit different than middle class people. This is broad generalizations, right? There's exceptions to all this. Middle class people tend to not be very religious, right? Religion is not, they're not into it, right? Working class people, tend to go to church on Sunday, right? That's people of color tend to be religious. White working class people tend to be religious. Socialist groups, I've noticed, often have this weird attitude. They are run by white middle class intellectuals. And if a person of color is religious, they will say, oh, you're religious, that's because, and they have this this condescending, they don't respect you. They see you as inferior, but you're a person of color, you're a victim of racism, so they don't care. If a white person is religious, they hate them. Oh, you're religious, huh? You must hate gay people. You must be a reactionary. Get out of here, right? And you see this in many, many different ways, right, in socialist groups, right? The white middle-class intellectuals run the group, and their attitude, Mexican Communist League. Their attitude is basically cultural working class things that white people do cultural working class things, if white people do them, that proves that they are evil and they're despicable human beings. And if black people do them, oh, that's just because they're poor oppressed black people. And it is weird, right? Working class people, right? I mean, religion, right? That's one thing, right? I don't know, corporal punishment, right? That's one thing that goes on, right? White working class people spank their kids. People of color tend to spank their kids. It's again, exceptions to all of this, but culturally speaking, that's something that goes on in working class households. Again, a lot of these white middle class intellectuals that run socialist groups, right? If a person of color spanks their kids, well, whatever. If a white person does it, they're an evil child abuser. And again, it is based on this kind of, all right, tips for starting. All right, and that there is kind of this weird attitude that low-income white workers are Satan. Low-income white workers are all in the Ku Klux Klan. They're all Nazis. They're all evil, whereas people of color are just victims. And so they view people of color in this kind of condescending white savior complex way. They view white workers as evil. Working class is defined by production relations. Workers only live by selling their labor power in order to live. Exactly, David. And so this goes on, right? And that in urban areas, you get a lot of white middle-class intellectuals who don't think white workers exist and have a very condescending white savior complex toward people of color. And neither are good. Neither are good, right? At the end of the day, the working class should be the ones to fight for workers' power. I don't know what I'm talking about here. I'm just, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. All right, but anyway, alrighty. There's many examples of American socialists being classist. I've described this before, right? So I guess you asked and I gave you an answer. Next question, the Black Belt thesis, right? So in the 1920s, the Communist Party of the United States, in cooperation with the Communist International, right, they came to the conclusion that black people in the United States constitute a nation, an oppressed nation within U.S. borders, and that because white people or because black people in the United States constitute an oppressed nation, they have the right to demand a national territory. And at that time, in the 1920s and 30s, the majority of African Americans in the United States lived in the Black Belt, which is, it's the United States, it's Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and it's a certain area. It's called the Black Belt. It's actually called that because of the soil, The soil in the United States, in this area is particularly fertile, and it is black. It's literally black. And so this area is called the Black Belt because of the black soil that's very fertile for growing crops. But that area, the Black Belt, that is an area where even today, there is still a majority African-American population there. And so during the 1930s, the Communist Party raised the demand for an independent Soviet Republic of the Black Belt, self-determination for the Black Belt. And what's interesting is that demand for an independent black republic, right? Again, the communists never took the position. It's important to be clear on this. They never said the Black Belt should separate from the United States. They said it would have the right to do it. That if the majority of people living in the Black Belt wanted to break away from the United States, the Communist Party would support that. They were for self-determination. If the Black Belt wanted to remain part of the United States, they would support that. But if the Black Belt wanted independence, they would support that, right? And that position, that was a key part of communist politics in the 1930s, in the Black Belt thesis, the self-determination thesis, that was dropped by Earl Browder. Earl Browder backed away from that position. And then after World War II, when Earl Browder was toppled by William Z. Foster, they reinstated the Black Belt thesis. And Claudia Jones and Paul Robeson and a number of the African-American leaders of the Communist Party very much defended that position. And that was very much part of what American communists believed. They believed that black people were struggling for their freedom as a nation, rather than struggling as simply victims of racism. And this was a big divide in the Communist Party, right? Because in 1954, you have the Montgomery bus boycott, you have the rise of the civil rights movement, which the Communist Party supported. But the question became, there was Malcolm X, and there was a whole history of black nationalism in the United States, Marcus Garvey, figures like that. The question became, should communists just 100% support Dr. Martin Luther King, or should they maintain their support for black nationalists? And that became a big divide, right? Should they support only Dr. Martin Luther King? Should they kind of support Dr. Martin Luther King but give their main support to black nationalism? That became a big divide. And in 1957, after the death of Stalin, after the secret speech by Khrushchev, there was the famous 1957 convention of the Communist Party. And at the 1957 convention of the Communist Party, at that convention, you had the you had the position of the black belt being dropped by the Communist Party. The Communist Party no longer believed in independence for the black belt. Patriotism without a state. All right, so they no longer believed in the independence of the black belt. And so the early Maoist movement, right, the Progressive Labor Party and many of the Maoist groups that developed were people who had been in the Communist Party who continued to believe in the black belt thesis. You can read Harry Haywood in his book Black Bolshevik. You can read the writings of Nelson Puri, his book Black Radical. There are many memoirs of African American members of the Communist Party who believed in the independence of the black belt and broke away and became Maoists because they continued believing in the independence of the black belt. And I've talked about this many times, the black belt thesis of the Communist International and the support for black people as a nation rather than simply a group of people that endure discrimination. That was a key point of disagreement. And my position remains in regards to the black belt, in regards to the indigenous people, in regards to the Old Southwest and Aztlan, that's like New Mexico, Southern California, Texas, that if the Chicano people want to separate from the United States, they have the right to do it, but I don't impose that on them. If the black people of the black belt wanted to break away from the United States and form an independent nation, I would support their right to do it. If the indigenous groups, if Native Americans wanted to break South Dakota and North Dakota away and form an indigenous republic, I would support their right to do it, but I don't advocate it. I don't advocate it because if I advocate it as a white person, that sounds like segregation. Right? To not separate. If black people don't want to separate, well, I would never try to tell people of color they have to separate. That's segregation. Right? I would never tell the Chicano people of the Southwest, you have to break away and form your own country. That's segregation. So the issue of self-determination is there are oppressed nations and nationalities within the United States, right? The people, the African-American people are a nation and they are oppressed. And if they wanted to break away, I would support their right to do it, if they wanted to. But right now, it seems like the position of the black community is that they don't. So I don't go around advocating something that the black community doesn't want because coming from me as a white guy, it sounds like segregation, and I would never force it on them. So, this is the whole issue of decolonization that often gets brought up. People ask, are you for decolonization? Yes, I am, right? I am for, if the indigenous groups want to secede from the United States and have an independent country, they should be given that right. And the same for the Chicano people and Aztlan. The same for the black community in the United States. Appalachia. Some people argue that Appalachia is a nation and is oppressed as a nation. I'm not sure of that, but it's an interesting discussion to have. But if the peoples of Appalachia, West Virginia, Kentucky, etc., felt they were colonized as a nation, wanted to break away and form an independent Appalachian republic, again, I would support their right to do it, but I would never go to Appalachia as a non-Appalachian and try to tell them that they had to do it. And this is an important point because communists get very confused on this. Communists often get very confused. The majority of communists don't believe in independence for these nationalities, right? But then you get some people that do, and and make it almost a fetish, and they draw maps of what the future USA will look like when we divide up everyone according to that. Don't go there. To most people who see a map like that, you look like a white supremacist. You look like the Ku Klux Klan or something. So don't go there, right? The important thing is to just recognize that colonized people have the right to, if they want to, have their own territory, and that's that, right? And if there was a mass movement in the United States of black people wanting an independent black country, as a communist, you would have to support it. But right now, there is not such a thing, right? There was in the 1930s. There was in the 1970s. Right now, there is not such a thing. That is the position, and that's what you should learn from the Black Belt thesis. And it's something to think about because, it's something to think about because it's, I don't know. Anyway, I'm tired, folks, but that's okay. I'm going to keep answering your super chats because I value every moment I have with you all. And yeah, this has been a wild day with that little break in the middle, but you're all back, and I'm glad you're here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Choosing a career. Well, look, I would recommend that you choose a career based on not what you are interested in necessarily, but just based on how you would prefer to pay your bills, right? My whole life, everyone, my family, oh, you're going to be a college professor when you grow up, Caleb. You're going to be a college professor. You're interested in all this politics stuff. You're going to be a college professor. Well, I went to college. I didn't like it. And I didn't like the life that my college professors had. It didn't look like an interesting life to me. So, they were wrong. But am I interested in the kind of things college professors talk about? Sure. But ultimately, that was not how I ended up paying my bills. I worked at an insurance company for a while, and now I do my journalism work. Sports. All right. All right. Rosa Luxemburg. Alrighty. So, and that's what I would urge you to do, right? Think about how you'd like to pay your bills for the rest of your life. What gig, what job do you want to do to support yourself? And go to college and study and choose a career path based on that. I think we need to get past, there's this kind of like middle-class American view that like you're going to live your dreams, and that's not how these things work, right? That's really not how these things work. Like, you're going to live your dreams, you're going to be, no, in reality, most people go to work and they're alienated from their labor, right? They don't feel attached to their job, they're selling their labor to a boss, and that's the situation most people are going to be in. So find a way you can sell your labor that's not the worst thing you can do, right? I mean, find something, you'll like to do something, or you're good at one particular thing. When I was in college, I remember I did a number of jobs. I did a cleaning job. I worked on my college maintenance crew for a long time. I cleaned the dorms. I was awful at it. For some reason, when you clean a room, right, you have to be able to pay attention to all the little details, get it perfectly clean. That's just not where I'm at. I was very bad at it. But there's some people that are very good at you got to find, some people have a lot of attention to little details. Some people are very physically strong. Some people are very visual, right? Like for me, I could never be a graphic design artist because I just don't have the eye for it. I don't, right? I'm just, for whatever reason, things look good to me, they look bad to other people. Some people have a real eye for graphic design. Some people don't. I do not, right? But if you do, right, that's a skill that you could fine-tune. You could take classes on graphic design. You could start doing graphic design gigs. I mean, find something that you would enjoy doing to pay your bills and do it. That's my advice for choosing a career path. Did I ever think I would be in the position that I currently am? No, sir. No, sir, I did not. I had a lot of different ideas about where I would end up, and this is where I ended up, and I'm happy to be here, and I love you all, and I love what I do. But I did not in a million years. If you had asked me when I was 19, hey, what do you think you're going to be? I never would have told you where I am now. Right? There's an old expression, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, and I think that is absolutely true. All right. Distributism. Distributism is a Roman Catholic anti-capitalist theory, and that's what it is. It is, it's 1930s, it's conservative anti-capitalism from the Roman Catholic Church. It's anti-Marxist, but it argues that, it's one of these kind of, it's not fascism, but it's the kind of thing that people on the right who are very anti-communist in the 1930s, but critical of capitalism developed, right? It's the idea that, the church will control the economy some way to make sure everything's good, but we'll still have capitalism. And I don't really, I had the opportunity to debate a distributist once. And I thought, why am I going to do this? Nobody knows what distributism is. It is an obscure ideology from the 1930s of Roman Catholic anti-capitalists, but from the right. Why would I, I looked at it and I thought, okay, I'm going to argue it. And that's the thing. That's the way these things work. So, all right, okay, utilitarianism, right? The belief that, you want to achieve the greatest good of the greatest number of people, Jeremy Bentham. I don't know, it's a philosophical concept. It's not really relevant to what we're talking about on here. It's, it's whatever. So, all right. So many things here. All right, which CIA faction is the most complicit in regime change? Well, the CIA is the regime change faction. That's what they do. So, I don't know. I'm not in on the meetings where I'm not part of the CIA. They don't tell me these things. So, I talk about divisions in the deep state and the ruling class. I talked about Gina Haspel and her role and what she wants the United States to look like versus Technocracy. And you can observe there are differences within the deep state, and I've talked about Indiana suddenly becoming prominent in American politics and why that is and stuff. So, these things are interesting, but at the end of the day, the CIA is a regime change organization. That's what they do. Now, there are differences and different, intelligence, there is like that. There are different wings that do different things and focus on different aspects. But at the end of the day, there are different strategies, but they are a regime change institution. So I don't think there's an anti-regime change part of the CIA. So, that would be like there's not an anti-war part of the military. Alrighty. Am I a Freemason? No, I am not. I am not a Freemason. I don't think I could become one. I think they banned communists, if I'm not mistaken, but I wouldn't want to be a Freemason. I'm amused by the history of Freemasonry. Because, well, first of all, there's a bunch of stupid, crazy conspiracy theories about Masonry. Well, most of them are just, silly, and they're not true. But as far as, the actual history, the Masonry, as this kind of, fraternal brotherhood, it played a key role in European history at one point. It's not really relevant now. At this point, Masonry is just kind of a club, But at one point, and we're talking like the 1800s, 1700s, when presidents were in it and stuff, it was a meaningful thing, and it was kind of an association, it's anti-Catholic. I believe Catholics were not allowed to join because they might give secrets to the confessors, and that there was kind of a Unitarian message, right? I believe if you get high enough in Masonry, you would study the Quran as well as the Bible, and there's kind of a Unitarian, vague, kind of liberal, mainline Protestant message to the teachings. But it's largely, it was a movement of capitalists that were opposed to feudalism, and it was, in Britain, in France, in Scotland, it was just, it was a movement. It was kind of a society for capitalists who were opposed to feudalism and believed in, the rights of man and free markets and such. The name Mason comes from bricklayers, and there's a lot of mythology associated with Masonry. They claim to go all the way back to the Temple of King Solomon, and that's not true. And that it's, they talk about the Knights Templar who brought the secrets of the Middle Ages, right? Some of the mathematical and astronomical breakthroughs, astrological breakthroughs, astronomy breakthroughs from the Middle East back to Europe, and then were persecuted by the Pope. And, it's just, at one point in American history, fraternities were a big deal, right? I remember, talking to my grandparents and them explaining to me that, before TV was invented, the Tuesday night card game in the small town was really important, right? Because no one had any television. And so, Tuesday night, everyone went to their lodge and played cards. And there was the Masons, they were a lodge, and they were kind of an elite lodge, and there was the Elks Club, and there was the Loyal Order of the Moose, and there was the Odd Fellows Club, and there was and then Roman Catholics had the Knights of Columbus, and that, as part of quaint pre-television America, 1920s, 1930s, that was what people did to get through life, is they had fraternal organizations, right? They had brotherhoods, right? And that back then, you have to remember, there was no unemployment insurance. And so these groups offered what they called social insurance. If you lost your job, you could get, like some social insurance from the group until you found a new job. So people would pay money in, and it was a social insurance, right? You lost your job, they would take care of you a little bit, right? And that's how these groups associated. What's also interesting is that there was a communist version of this in the 1920s and 30s. It was called the International Workers' Order, the IWO. And it was a fraternal organization for communists, right? Because they had their own, right? They had social insurance. If you joined the IWO, the International Workers' Order, and you lost your job, they would, give you some money and help you get through. There was the Socialist Party. They had one called the Workmen's Circle. And it was the same kind of thing. It was, it was a fraternal organization. They had, banquets and dinners and Tuesday night card games. And if you lost your job, the Workmen's Circle could bail you out, right? And that was the idea, the fraternal organizations. Now, Masonry goes back a little bit further, and that's, the French Revolution and French Revolution and all of that. And it's more complicated than that. But ultimately, as the bourgeoisie was overthrowing the feudal ruling class, they set up these organizations, these kind of secret societies to push their agenda, right? I mean, you can go even further. You can talk about, it was illegal for a long time. The Catholic Church didn't permit any scientific research, and alchemy emerged. And alchemy was kind of a weird occult religion practice, but it kind of also gave birth to modern chemistry, right? And it was like people trying to turn lead into gold, and they had some like mystical beliefs about different metals, but it was also doing research about chemical compounds and stuff like that. And that alchemy was also kind of a secret society of people who investigated science, and and that this was, during the time of feudalism. You have to remember, there was no freedom of speech. There was no freedom of assembly. If you disagreed with the Catholic Church, that was called heresy, and you got burned at the stake. So, as the capitalists, guild socialism, as the capitalist class was fighting for its independence from feudalism, they developed a lot of, secret societies and mystical orders and stuff to bring down feudalism. And that's where Masonry comes out of. Nowadays, Masonry is just a club, and nowadays we all have TVs, so we don't have to do the Tuesday night card game. There's a pandemic, so you couldn't even have the Tuesday night card game. It would be a health code violation. But, they still exist. They have buildings. People rent the Masonic Lodge to have concerts and weddings, and it's a thing that goes on all over the country. You see Masonic lodges, and it's an association, right? So thanks for asking about Freemasonry. No, I am not a Freemason. I think they ban communists. If I'm not mistaken, I think Masonry actually has a ban on communists, but I don't know that. I'll have to ask a Freemason. I don't know. I assume that they would, but I could be wrong. There you go. Marxism is a guide to action, says David Fox, and he could not be more correct, right? Marxism is a guide to action. It is a tool. Marxism is a tool that you can use. It is a method, and socialism is a tool, right? That's how we need to understand this. Socialism is a tool. Marxism is a tool, right? It's about getting us to the goal of a society without classes and oppression. It's about getting us to a whole new world where people are not oppressed. It's about countries raising themselves up from poverty. For activists, Marxism is a method for understanding the world and trying to change it. But Marxism is a tool and a guide to action. We need to not think of it as this mystical magic, and that's what this anti-revisionism kind of thing that I was talking about earlier does. All righty. Wild day today, isn't it? Why do Maoists call every country revisionist? Well, that was in my opening remarks. I talked about that. They call every country revisionist because actually acknowledging that something good would exist would kind of get in the way of their idealistic, pessimistic, destructive thinking. I think it's rooted in a psychological desire to hold on to the toxicity that we've all absorbed from the system, right? Most Maoists, third worldists, just sit on the internet, right? And it's a way to just, it's like there's no good group in the world except for the Naxals or the Sendero Luminoso in Peru. Every other group is phony and fake. There is no hope. There is no future. Well, if any really existing socialism country comes along, that would shake up your worldview. So they have to abandon it. But it's more than that. The reason that Maoists think every country is revisionist, the reason for that is because So you have to remember, the Soviet Union and China were allies. Then China and the Soviet Union didn't agree with each other. 1961, Soviet Union and China cut their ties with each other. China called the Soviet Union revisionist. Said that the Soviet Union was trying to hold back Third World Revolution, which is true. Khrushchev was trying to hold back Third World Revolution. But it wasn't until 1969 that the Soviet Union that China started saying the Soviet Union was imperialist. Right? They said that they were communist, they lost their way, they'd become revisionist. 1969, after the fall of Lin Biao, the rise of the Gang of Four, you have a situation where suddenly they're referring to the Soviet Union as social imperialists. The Soviet Union is socialist in words, but imperialist in deeds, right? State capitalism, etc. So on that basis, all the countries that were aligned with the Soviets were then puppets of Soviet social imperialism, right? 78, you have Deng Xiaoping invading Vietnam, saying he's going to liberate Vietnam from the Soviet social imperialists. So, if you maintain that what China did in the early 70s, when it was against the Soviet Union and cut off from the communist world, announced the communist world were all traitors, if you're going to maintain those politics, that what happened in the Gang of Four era, 1969 until Mao's death, was like pure communism, right? If you're going to maintain this view that the Cultural Revolution was the most advanced thing in human history, you're going to maintain that view. Of course, you have to hate every socialist country, because none of the existing socialist countries that exist today were aligned with China's position. Alrighty. Why are people homeless? Because there are too many houses. Well, because under capitalism, houses are not produced so people can live in them. Houses are produced so that profits can be made from them. And the housing bubble burst. Do you remember the housing bubble bursting back in 2008? What had happened was Alan Greenspan was desperately trying to keep Americans buying homes. Americans' living standards had vastly declined. Americans could not afford to keep buying homes at the same rate. And if Americans stopped buying homes, then all the people involved in building homes, you wouldn't even be allowed in the Continental Freemasons. They have women and non-religious members and can attack politics and religion, says Socialist Dragon. Oh, okay. I don't know enough about modern masonry to answer that question. But, at that point, Americans couldn't keep buying homes. There were all these homes being built. Americans couldn't afford to keep buying them. So Alan Greenspan legalized all kinds of predatory lending practices that had previously been illegal to keep Americans buying homes. But at the end of the day, the housing bubble burst, and a whole bunch of banks collapsed, and a whole bunch of people lost their jobs. And all across America, you had tent cities springing up. You had foreclosed homes all throughout neighborhoods. You had a situation where people were homeless all across America because too many houses were being produced, and Americans couldn't afford to keep buying them, right? The wages of Americans had gone down. The living standards of Americans had gone down. They couldn't afford to keep buying homes. And that's the reality. The living standards of Americans had dropped and dropped and dropped. That we're at a situation where Americans largely cannot afford to have that standard American home with the white picket fence. So at that point, the economy is in a situation where people are homeless because there are too many houses. The housing bubble burst. That's capitalism becomes more and more efficient. Makes it easier to produce goods, easier to build things, easier to create products than ever before. In the process, reduces the role of workers in production, drives wages down, eliminates workers from the assembly line, de-skills the workers that are already there. In the process of doing that, creates a situation where people are too poor to buy those products that were efficiently created. This is the classic problem of overproduction and the falling rate of profits. This is basic Marxism. So there. The Mexican Communist League. I'll have to look them up. I know in Mexico, the main communist party, it's like the party that carries the Soviet legacy, is called the Popular Socialist Party, and that was like the Communist Party of Mexico. There is a group that calls itself the Mexican Communist Party, and they're like a Maoist, anti-revisionist grouping. Probably the largest communist party in Mexico is the PT, the Workers' Party, which used to be followers of Enver Hoxha in Albania. And now they are kind of more of a broad communist or socialist party. The Workers' Party of Mexico, PT, they have seats in the government. They're part of the ruling coalition of AMLO. They are the biggest communist party in Mexico. It used to be the Popular Socialist Party. They were the pro-Soviet party. They not so much anymore. There is something called the Mexican Communist Party, which is like maoist, anti-revisionists. And now the big party is a formerly Hojist party that is now just a mainline pro-Bolivarian communist party called the PT. In Mexico. So there you go. All right. In Chiapas, there is like the indigenous group that is the Zapatistas, and sometimes they are anarchists. They talk like anarchists. Other times they're talking like an indigenous kind of separatist group there in Chiapas, and that's the left in Mexico, basically, from my understanding. Based on international meetings I've been to and studying that I've done. You've got Zapatistas that are an indigenous kind of separatist group that is influenced by both anarchism and Marxism. You've got the Popular Socialist Party, which is the remnant of the old, Comintern party. It's the old pro-Soviet party. You have the PT, which used to be a pro-China and pro-Albania party, which has now become a regular communist party. And then you have the Communist Party of Mexico, which is a breakaway that is also kind of pro-Mao, pro-Stalin. One of these more hardline, tanky parties is the Mexican Communist Party. So that's basically leftism in Mexico. Tips for starting an online channel. Do it. Go and do it. You learn by doing. I started this YouTube channel when I was in college. When I was in college, I debated a conservative on my campus. I had a public debate with a conservative. It started out that I wrote for my college's newspaper, right? Around 2008. It was 2008. It was the summer. It was as the 2008 election was starting. The spring of 2008, I was writing articles for my college's newspaper. And this conservative guy who was on my campus started writing articles in response to my articles in the college newspaper. So I had the brilliant idea of having a debate with this conservative. His name was Tim Davey. So Tim Davey and I had a public debate, and it was the biggest event I had ever organized on the campus. His whole fraternity came, every socialist and communist in the area came, the local John Birch Society came, and everybody came. It was a big thing, and the RCP people came from the Revolutionary Communist Party and anarchists, and it was like the biggest event. Members of the local DSA turned out. It was seeing Caleb, the socialist, debate Tim Davey, the conservative slash libertarian. It was like the biggest event we'd ever done. I mean, it's a little tiny college in Ohio. So we had our debate, and I had my friend video it, and I wanted to save the video. I didn't want the video of my debate to go away. I wanted the debate to be public. So I posted the video on a YouTube channel, and at that point you could only have 10-minute video segments. And so I posted the debate on YouTube. Eventually I was able to put the whole thing on Google Video, and then eventually I could put the whole debate up on YouTube. That's why I started this YouTube channel. And then it just kind of sat there. And every so often, I think I experimented with making like little like music propaganda kind of videos or something. And that was it. And then when I moved to New York, every so often in New York, I would give a speech at a Workers' World Party event. So I would take that speech and put it on my YouTube channel. Why not, right? And then, and I would do that every so often. And I noticed that these videos would get, it was like they would get like 500 views or something. That was a big deal. I thought, wow, 500 views, that's something. Okay, I would post them in communism, Reddit, whatever. So, one thing leads to another. Eventually, I'm working as a journalist. I start posting my journalistic content on my YouTube channel. Not paying attention to subscribers and all of that. And then somebody pointed out to me I could do live streams. So I started doing live streams. And I started doing live streams every Saturday. I would do a live stream. I started that tradition about 2 years ago. And that made my channel blow up even bigger. And then the pandemic happened. So now we can't go anyplace. So I'm here right now. I'm not out partying. I'm not here out organizing socialist events. I'm sitting here talking to you on YouTube because I can't really do anything because this is where I'm at. So I started doing them all the time. Plus I started debating other big name YouTubers. I debated Vosh. I debated Stefan Molyneux. and I've started engaging with other YouTube channels, right? And, I was on Lionel's YouTube channel. He's a conservative commentator. He invited me on his channel to talk about communism a couple times. And so that's where the YouTube channel came from. But I didn't create this channel setting out to make a prosperous YouTube channel. It was really just because I had this debate in college back in 2008, and I wanted to save the debate. That's how this YouTube channel started. So I didn't start this like I am going to start a YouTube channel and get rich and become a big media influencer. That's not what I did. I just came into this saying, I believe in socialism. I want to save this debate, posted here, posted there. And now, 10 years later, not more than 10 years, now like 14 years later, here we are, right? 14,000 subscribers and rising. So here we are. And we're going to keep going. And if they take this channel down, I'll be on another platform live streaming on there. So that's where this YouTube channel came from. So again, I'm not good at the whole advice thing. My life is very unconventional, and my YouTube channel is very unconventional. The debate is in the videos. Go dig it up if you want to watch it. But my career path, very unconventional, right? So people ask me, how can I get into what you do for a living? I'm not a good model for that. Where I ended up in terms of my career is not the normal path. Again, with YouTube, how do you set up a YouTube channel? Don't ask me that, because the way this whole YouTube channel was set up was not the normal way of doing things. Ask somebody who consciously said, I want to go and be a YouTuber. Find that person and ask them, because that is not what I set out to do. I kind of accidentally tripped into this. Here I am kind of accidentally, right? But then again, that gives me a more natural vibe here. I didn't take a big course on how to do YouTube. And honestly, I wish many people have said to me that I should have a better production values, right? I've told you, I'm not a very good visual design, right? People say that the images on here are completely crappy. I believe them. They don't look crappy to me. They don't look good to me either. I can't judge that, but I believe them, right? So, maybe at some point I'll start investing in having like a production crew. Right, the lighting in this room. I'm thinking about getting the lighting in this room better, because the lighting here is not good. If I had like a light in front of me, my face would look better, right? Stuff like that, right? But then again, a lot of people say that they like this because they say it has a more natural and realistic quality. Because at the end of the day, I'm not on here, I'm not giving you like a whole Madison Avenue advertising message. I'm just a guy on here talking into my iPhone, right? And that a lot of people like that because it gives it a more natural look. It's not fake. It's not phony. So there you go. Herb Bryant. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Yeah, exactly. So there you go. So I'm really not the person to ask about YouTube. But there you go. But I'm here and I ain't going anywhere until they ban me, and then I'll go somewhere else. Can one have patriotism without a state? I would think that one can have a feeling of affection and loyalty to the place in which one lives without a state, sure. Obviously I would like to see a stateless, classless world of vast material abundance, but in that world, would one feel affection? In a stateless, classless world, would people who live in Scotland have a special feeling of loyalty to Scotland? Probably. It would be much less, and it probably would be less loaded in emotions, but yes, I don't think so. I think that, one can feel affection toward their country of origin, regardless of a state. All right, should sports avoid politics? No, I think athletes are people just like anyone else, right? Colin Kaepernick is an athlete, and he has politics. Good for him. Muhammad Ali was an athlete, and he was very political. Good for him. I will say this, and I think this is kind of interesting, is I was kind of brought up to not like athletes, right? I think, people call me nerdy. My family is not very athletic. My dad was certainly not very athletic, and neither am I. I work out now to keep in shape, but I was never a very good athlete. And when I first started coming around communist groups, I was always blown away that there were so many people who played sports. And I never understood that. I'm like, it seemed like people that play sports are kind of the people who wouldn't be interested in Marxism and dialectical materialism and all of that. They would be interested in playing sports and think you're a big fat nerd if you do that. But what I didn't understand is that in the 1960s and 70s, sports in the United States were highly, highly politicized. And the reason for that is because black people are very well represented in athletics, and black people were fighting for their freedom. And so you had, figures like Muhammad Ali, you had football players who were outspoken. And so in the 1960s, sports and the Black liberation movement kind of walked hand in hand. You've seen the picture of the guys at the Olympics giving the fist salute. So because of that, people that were interested in athletics were interested in sports, were interested in politics. And I think that's interesting, right? And that was new to me. That was very, very new to me. But that's how things work. The other factor that, again, this is the more negative side to that, right? There's a positive and a negative. And the main reason I think that so many older 1960s communists were athletic when they were young is because of the fact that athletics was very politicized in the 60s and 70s. Not as much as it is now. We have Colin Kaepernick, but not really, right? But now it's politicized. Now it's not as politicized. But in the 60s and 70s, sports was a place that there was a lot of politics because of everything that was happening in the world. However, there's another side to it too, and I hate to go here. I'm going to sound like an asshole, but let's be real. All right, when you're in high school, the cool kids, the ones who everyone, who date all the cheerleaders, and, they're athletics, right? I mean, it's, the jocks, right? The football stars are the most popular kids. And let's be real, right? The reason, communism was very, very popular in the United States. Marshall. Communism was very, very popular in the United States and in places like New York City and San Francisco and Chicago, not in most of the country, but in urban centers, it was very much the hip, cool thing to do to protest against the war and have long hair and smoke weed and be into communism, right? That was, it was a very cool, hip thing to do. And so, the fact that people would be into being an athlete, which makes you the really cool guy if you're the star football player in high school, and they'd be into going to anti-war protests and smoking dope and fighting the man, makes a little bit of sense. Makes a lot of sense, right? But that kind of points to some of the problems we have in the communist movement now, because nowadays, it's not really cool to be interested in Marxism. I mean, people go and protest and stuff, but, fundamentally, being a Marxist means you're a nonconformist. Being a Marxist means that in essence you are a nonconformist. You're going against what is cool. You're going against what you're being told to believe in. Right? So it's a little bit of a contradiction. That's why these communist groups, a lot of them are old men generally, who played football and played sports, and they were popular guys in high school. And they were in high school in 1967, 1968, and 1969. And the cool thing to do at that time, not just to play football, but also to go out and protest and fight the man, was the very cool thing. Look, I've heard stories. It was weird. I was not alive in the 1970s, obviously, but I've heard stories from older people, about that time. And I mean, the economy in the USA was booming, but there was a big culture war going on, right? And they called it the generation gap, but it was a culture war, right? The ultra-rich were kind of mobilizing to loosen up U.S. culture against the lower level of the bourgeoisie that were, McCarthyist and right. So there was a culture war going on, and young people were generally on the side of the liberals in the culture war. Older people were conservative. And even in my little town, I remember somebody in my family told me, they were in high school in the 70s, and that there was a guy at their high school who carried Mao's little red book with him he had it in his front pocket, his Mao's little red book. And everyone thought he was such a badass because, he's carrying Mao's little red book. Look at him, and that guy probably didn't understand a word that was in there, but it was like, yeah, take that, and then in the 70s, right, that, Mao's little red book and being, people didn't think about it with depth, but it was, you were fighting the system. You were opposing the status quo, and that there was kind of a, it's like, they talk about baby boomers, right, and how, there was a movie, Bonnie and Clyde. It was about outlaws, and it was a popular movie, and that they all wanted to be, fighting the system and getting arrested and running from the government, man. It was the cool thing to do, and so part of that was a kind of communist aesthetic, right, a kind of vaguely communist aesthetic fit in with the counterculture. And so based on that, you had people that were the hip, cool kids in the school might have Mao's Red Book in their front pocket, but they didn't know what it meant. They were just trying to be hip and cool and show they were not going to listen to their teachers and they were going to fight back. These are aesthetic kind of things, right? It's kind of interesting to think about because nowadays, right? I mean, if you went to high school and you had Mao's little Red Book in your pocket, people wouldn't even know what it was. People would be like, "Oh, you have a red notebook? I mean, why don't you carry your notebook in your backpack?" I mean, people wouldn't know what it are. People wouldn't know what it is. I mean, it would just be, so there you go. All right, that was my rant about sports and politics. Okay, this is a crazy live today. I must say. This is a wild thing. Not only do we have our break, so we're on part 2, but now I'm rambling about high school and sports, and this is the strangest live I've done in a long time. I'm going to have to watch this afterwards and see if I delete this thing or not, because this got way weird at some points. But that's okay. I'm having fun. Do you think I should delete it, folks, or should we leave it up here for posterity? Who the hell knows? All righty. Okay, Rosa Luxemburg in Germany is the next super chat question. Rosa Luxemburg. All right. Rosa Luxemburg was a German social democrat or Marxist. She was a German Marxist. She was in the Social Democratic Party of Germany, and she opposed World War I. And she opposed World War I, and the German Social Democratic Party sold out World War I. Rosa Luxemburg was born in Poland, but she lived in Germany, and she was against World War I. She was one of the most well-known writers and agitators in the socialist movement. She hated Edward Bernstein and his revisionism. She wrote a pamphlet, Reform or Revolution, and ripped Edward Bernstein to shreds. World War I started. She was against the war. The Social Democrats sold out and supported the war. She opposed it. So she went to prison for protesting the war, and she was in prison through a lot of the war. World War I came to its conclusion. It ended, right? And there was a workers' uprising at the end of World War I. And Rosa Luxemburg, just like the rest of the Germans, supported that uprising that brought down the Kaiser. But then the question became, should they write a capitalist constitution, or should they write a socialist constitution? And the Social Democrats went along with Karl Kautsky and Schneiderman and Ebhardt and others, and they wrote the Weimar capitalist constitution. Rosa Luxemburg, on the other hand, she and Karl Liebknecht, they were leaders of Spartacusbund, the Spartacist League, or the Spartacusbund, and they led an uprising to fight for a Soviet Germany. And they wrote a beautiful pamphlet you can read. It's one of the most beautifully written socialist pamphlets I've ever read. It's called What Does the Spartacist League Want? And it's written by Rosa Luxemburg. It's one of the most fiery anti-imperialist Marxist pamphlets I've ever read. Go read What Does the Spartacist League Want by Rosa Luxemburg. Great stuff. They led this uprising against the Social Democrats to keep fighting for socialism, not to ratify this Weimar capitalist constitution. And so the Social Democrats, they went with the military and the police. They hired the Freikorps, which were like free officers, among them Adolf Hitler and a lot of future Nazis. And they killed Rosa Luxemburg, and they dumped her body in a river. And along with Karl Rope, and it's very, very tragic. Rosa Luxemburg was an anti-imperialist and a Marxist, very committed. Now, Rosa Luxemburg was not committed. She held on to Marx's belief that all nationalism is reactionary. She didn't agree with Lenin's thesis that there can be progressive nationalism. But at the end of the day, the first Congress of the Communist International actually began with a moment of silence in honor of Rosa Luxemburg. And so there you go. I mean, yes, a great revolutionary figure, a lot we can learn from Rosa Luxemburg. All right, technocracy and socialism. Well, technocracy is the belief that smart people should rule, right? Like the idea is that skilled technicians and engineers and scientists should rule over the rest of us, right? It's like if only the smart people could be in charge, everything would be fine. We need to find the smart people, put them in charge. The problem isn't capitalism. The problem is we have stupid people in charge, so we just got to put the smart people in charge. Right? And you can see elements of technocracy in Andrew Yang's campaign. Andrew Yang ran for president in the Democratic primary. He failed. After that, now he's running for mayor of New York City. Right? And his slogan, he has hats that say math on them. And he emphasizes that he's a smart guy. And it's this belief that if the smart people, if you have smart technocrats running things, everything will be fine. The problem with technocracy is that it still doesn't address the issue, which is capitalism, right? We need smart people to run things. School of Ethics. Yeah, we need smart people to run things, but the problem isn't just that our leaders are stupid. The problem is capitalism and the rule of capitalists, and that Bonapartist movements and regimes will often emphasize a kind of technocratic aspect. We need to assume power for our faction on the part of the bourgeoisie. We need to assume power for our faction. And the reason we need to do that is because we're the smart ones. And the other faction, and we need the smart people to be put in power by one wing of the ruling class. In Silicon Valley, that's what they believe. They are the smartest guys. The rest of us are stupid, and they should seize power. The problem is capitalism, right? And that's the problem with the technocratic theory, is the problem is capitalism. But yes, in socialism, will we find the smartest minds, the greatest and most educated people, and put them to work about, build a brain trust to build a better economy? You betcha, right? Socialism can have elements of technocracy in it, but technocracy theory in and of itself doesn't resolve the problems of capitalism. Technocracy is not socialism, but I could see a socialist society like China that does this, right? With their 5-year plans, they have the smartest minds, smartest brains, coming together. You got to have the smartest people administering your economy. If you're going to have a planned economy, or the means of production are organized to serve public good, you're going to want to have the most qualified, smartest people, set up to administer it. No doubt about it. Okay. Guild socialism. Guild socialism is one of these, there's a lot of Wikipedia ideologies, okay? Like council communism, guild social, these are not real things, okay? They were real things a long time ago. They're not real things. There's no guild socialist country in the world. There are no major guild socialist parties. This was a big trend a long, long, long time ago. Marx mentions it in the Communist Manifesto and stuff. It ain't around, right? So, and that's, again, you read the Communist Manifesto, right? At the end of the Communist Manifesto, he argues against all these other forms of socialism that are not Marxist, right? He talks about guild socialism, he talks about reactionary socialism, he talks about German true socialism. None of that's around anymore, right? I mean, you can see elements of it reflected here or there, but as mass movements, they're not really around anymore. The main thing that kind of held together all of these ideologies that Marx was arguing against is that on some level or other, they all wanted to restore feudalism. Their criticism of capitalism was that it had stripped away the authority and the sacredness and the religiousness and the conservatism of feudalism. And so because of that, Marx argued against them. And that was essentially what, guild socialism, reactionary socialism, noble socialism, that was what they were all really about, was we want to restore some of the order and stability and authoritarianism of feudalism. We're critical of capitalism from the right? Capitalism is not conservative enough, and Marx is saying, no, we want to be revolutionary, and we want to, go even beyond capitalism to a more stateless, egalitarian, classless world. That's the difference, okay? That's really, in essence, the difference. Feudalism is so far gone at this point. I mean, feudalism is really far gone. You really don't have people in the United States who want to bring back feudalism, right? Yeah, I mean, you don't really have people going around saying we really need to bring back feudalism, except for the Beach Boys. You ever hear their song "Surfing USA"? Reactionaries. Just kidding. All right, I don't do comedy for a reason. All right, but anyway, folks, yeah. Anyway, okay. All right, Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, he basically, he's, the big academic, and I argue that Noam Chomsky is really a social democrat. That Noam Chomsky, he calls himself an anarchist. Noam Chomsky says he's an anarchist, he wants anarchy. But if you listen to Noam Chomsky, he's not really an anarchist, he's a social democrat. And the thing is, and this is what people need to get, thank you for giving me kudos on my pun. This has been such a wild live. We've talked all over the place about all kinds of stuff, and this has gotten so wild and wacky, whatever. But anyway, Noam Chomsky, right? And it's a really common trick. Noam Chomsky may have been the first person to do this, but Noam Chomsky says, I want a stateless world. I want a world without authority, so I'm an anarchist. That is not what an anarchist is. All Marxists, all socialists, all communists want a stateless, classless world. The difference between communists and social democrats and anarchists is this. How do you get there? Social democrats argue it just kind of naturally happens. Capitalism just kind of naturally turns into socialism. That's social democracy. Communists, on the other hand, say it is a struggle for political power, that there's a struggle to seize control of the state, to create a new socialist state, to organize the economy. Communists are revolutionaries. Social democrats are evolutionaries. Anarchists are non-political. That's what anarchists believe. They believe you can move toward a stateless, classless world without seizing the political power. The social democrat wants to nudge political power. The communist wants to seize political power. The anarchist wants to boycott political power. The anarchist says we're going to have worker cooperatives. The anarchist says we're only going to have labor struggles on the job. We're not going to vote. We're going to build our cooperative gardens with our friends. We're going to go out and break shit in the streets, but we're not going to participate in the political process. We're not going to try to seize the state. That's the difference. How do you approach politics? Social democrats want to nudge the political power. Communists want to seize the political power. Anarchists want to boycott the political power. What does Noam Chomsky advocate? Nudging the political power. Vote for the Democrats. Support the existing labor movement. He is nudging political power. By definition, he is not an anarchist, right? The goal is to get a stateless, classless world. The difference between the three trends of the left is about how you get there. Noam Chomsky likes to say he is an anarchist, but in essence, what he advocates is a social democratic political view. And a lot of people say, well, no, social democrats just want Norway and Sweden. Well, no, Norway and Sweden, according to social democracy, are eventually going to lead us on the road to a stateless, classless world, right? I mean, there are social democrats in power in Norway and Sweden, but that's not the end game. Social democrats in power in Norway and Sweden believe that eventually, after thousands of years of social democrats in power all over the world, we'll get to a stateless, classless world, right? Communists in China, they say, communists, their goal is China. No, it's not. Communists, China is on the road to building a more prosperous society. The goal is that eventually socialism all over the world leads to a stateless, classless world. That's the idea, right? So anyone who says, I'm an anarchist because I believe that we can eventually get to a stateless, classless world, that's not what it means to be an anarchist. That just means you are from the Marxist tradition. That's all it means. That is all it means. You are from the Marxist tradition. If you believe that we can get to a stateless, classless world, you're from the Marxist tradition. The question is, what wing of the Marxist tradition are you in? That's the issue. Martial arts are not jingoistic. I don't know. I mean, Taekwondo is kind of Korean. Like, they think Korea is like the best or something, don't they? I don't know enough about it, right? I really don't. I know nothing about martial arts. I think I did some lessons when I was a kid. I learned to punch and kick or something. But when it comes to the politics of martial arts and all that, I know absolutely nothing. But someone says martial arts are not jingoistic. Okay, I'll take your word for it. I'm not in a position to argue about it. If I remember correctly, I've been told by people that Taekwondo does have a Korean nationalist edge to it, but I have nothing other than what somebody once told me to base that position on, and so I'll take your word for it. I know nothing about it. Ask a martial arts practitioner. My friend Brenton Langle, the anarchist, he would love to. I'm sure he knows all about this. He's all into that karate and martial arts and stuff. I don't know enough about it. The Belt and Road has fallen since 2019. No, there's been a pandemic since 2019. I think the entire global economy slowed down very significantly since 2019. But the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank still exists. China still believes in the Belt and Road. It's just, there's not a lot of building going on. The whole economy is kind of, slowing down. Things are starting to wake up gradually now that the vaccine is here, and hopefully eventually we'll be at full speed again. But this pandemic is certainly disturbing, and obviously it's slowed down the Belt and Road. But China has not abandoned the Belt and Road. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is very well alive. What school of ethics should Marxists adhere to? Look, I am not. That's a philosophical thing, and I'm not. I'm not a philosophy major, and I can't answer that. I'm not here to tell you what ethical system you should adopt. Oh boy. There you go. All right. Okay. Anything else, folks? Any other questions before we go and end this crazy, crazy afternoon live stream? It is now dark outside here in New York City. I have sat here and engaged with you all. We had our 10-minute break, and this has been one of the wildest rides I've been on in a long time. But hey, wild days in our country. Donald Trump's being impeached again a few days before he's set to leave office. The military is occupying Washington, D.C. So what the heck? So any last questions before we wrap this up? We wrap up this crazy, wild live stream in the middle of the afternoon. Anything else? Anything at all? Anything? Anything you would like to get to us today? Anything else? Anything else? I will take a drink of unnamed diet beverage from this cup, and then, if there's nothing else, I'll conclude. Just wanted to say, I think your video reaching out to MAGA is exactly what we need these days. Johnny, thank you for that. And I'll tell you, I have never gotten so much positive feedback on a video as I got on that, right? It's weird. I assumed I would be widely condemned. And I mean, give it a few days. They'll get around to making their hate videos about me or whatever. But so many positive comments. So many people said, Caleb, I may not even agree with you about China or about this or that. That was an amazing video. Good work. Good work. So, you know, I can only hope that there's a few Trumpers who watched that video and woke up. Or maybe, you know, a lot of them, they watched that video, didn't agree with it, but it got into their head. And years from now, as material conditions change, maybe they'll revisit it and start to revisit what we have to say here. You know, you never know about these kind of things. Maybe we're planting the seeds, so to speak, of changing the world. So there you go. There you go, folks. There you go. All right, folks, I believe this concludes the live stream. So I wish you all the best. Remember that we need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. The martial arts comment was in agreement with how athletes being political, then saying how they roundhouse kick everyone. Okay, I don't even know what that means. You lost me there, Socialist Dragon, but okay, they roundhouse kick everybody. All right. There you go. We need a government of action to fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, folks. It's been fun. It's really been fun.